Right. Welcome to Heated Conversations, episode 6. Super excited about today's episode. We have someone who comes all the way from Houston, Texas. He's not necessarily in the world of gymnastics, but what he does is very crucial for gymnastics, especially when it comes to the event of vault. He is a world-renowned sprint coach of Fast University, and he has had athletes make it to Division I universities. He's also had athletes on the world stages. He's originally from Korea, but he resides here in Houston. Super excited to have Will Collins on Heated Conversations today. Welcome, Will Collins. How are you?
Man, I appreciate it, Coach. Appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to talk on here and get a chance to learn a little bit as well about the sport.
Yeah, no, we're super excited. So Will, we've been in conversations for a little bit of time now, and I would consider you especially a mentor for me in regards to sprint techniques and helping these young athletes to be able to excel in that area, but also excel in life. We've had many conversations about ways to be able to improve the sport of gymnastics in the area of vault and how to teach athletes to be more efficient in their running so they can produce more power and hopefully get a bigger vault out of it. Um,
Hmm.
as I know, and in conversations you and I have had, um, the aesthetics of gymnastics is counterproductive to what running technique it really requires, especially
Hmm.
with what the foot placement needs to be. In gymnastics, we're pointing our feet all the time, which is great. It makes the aesthetic of the sport really good. But in regards to running to produce power into a vault, we want the foot to be more dorsiflex and stuff like that, and being
Hmm.
able to have these conversations to be able to also teach gymnastics coaches that that's the way to be most efficient. And
Hmm.
from my understanding, the run doesn't get judged, so
Hmm.
it doesn't really matter necessarily if it's aesthetically pleasing.
Hmm.
Be as efficient as possible to produce
Hmm.
as much force and as much power and speed as
Hmm.
possible to produce the biggest vault that you possibly can. So can you kind of talk about, you know, um, a little bit about just the concept of, running techniques, and then we'll kind of go and kind of go over some of your credentials and stuff like that. But since we kind of intro talking about how running is for gymnastics, from a
Hmm.
sprinter's coach standpoint, why is
Hmm.
it beneficial to learn how to efficiently run on the vault apparatus from a sprinting coach's perspective?
Yeah, so dealing with the vault, for one, it's an event that incurs a lot of forces. So you're gonna, for one, have to take a lot of force from a horizontal aspect, and then in a short instant, translate it into some vertical. So with that, the more speed you have allows the opportunity for uh, that event or that exercise to be done a lot more effectively and a lot easily. Now, the hard part is the skill aspect of it, right? So, just as much as it takes to vault and go vertical, we need to focus on creating the force to go horizontal. And that's the basic conversation of sprinting and mechanics. When I was younger and I was, trying to start off in track and just running against athletes in middle school and things of that nature, um, we didn't know that there was a way to run, and we thought people were just fast, or people were talented or strong or whatever. Well, after watching people really run fast in high school, I started to see that there was a commonality in their body posture, a commonality in their movement pattern. So these things were teachable and they're coachable. So we were recognizing their body positioning for one, how their posture is, recognizing where their hip placement is in relativity to their shoulders and ankles, having a certain amount of body awareness. Also knowing how to apply force. These are all things that you learn through the art of sprinting, which quite easily translates directly into vaulting.
Yeah, very good. And talking about like the posture and stuff like that, in gymnastics, it's a huge part of what we do, right? Your
Mhm,
positioning, your posture, and then your timing are biggest things, right? And the
mhm,
position and posture kind of goes into what we call shaping. It's like the
mhm,
different shapes that you're going to use and being able to,
mhm,
train them static, but also train them moving and stuff like that. So then you're able
mhm.
to be as efficient. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of those postures and positions that are super necessary in regards to sprinting techniques?
So as far as sprinting, we want to have a as much of a um, straight line, ankle, hips, shoulders, head being stacked. It's very much similar to even in gymnastics. Um, as you focus on having straight lines to be able to do multiple events. I mean, not just one. I know many events in gymnastics are focused on having the same similar straight line through ankles, hips, and head. So cool. I started to see that there was a commonality in their body posture, a commonality in their movement pattern. So these things were teachable and they're coachable. So we were recognizing their body positioning for one, how their posture is, recognizing where their hip placement is in relativity to their shoulders and ankles, having a certain amount of body awareness. Also knowing how to apply force. These are all things that you learn through the art of sprinting, which quite easily translates directly into vaulting.
Yeah, very good. And talking about like the posture and stuff like that, in gymnastics, it's a huge part of what we do, right? Your
Mhm,
positioning, your posture, and then your timing are biggest things, right? And the
mhm,
position and posture kind of goes into what we call shaping. It's like the
mhm,
different shapes that you're going to use and being able to,
mhm,
train them static, but also train them moving and stuff like that. So then you're able
mhm.
to be as efficient. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of those postures and positions that are super necessary in regards to sprinting techniques?
So as far as sprinting, we want to have a as much of a um, straight line, ankle, hips, shoulders, head being stacked. It's very much similar to even in gymnastics. Um, as you focus on having straight lines to be able to do multiple events. I mean, not just one. I know many events in gymnastics are focused on having the same similar straight line through ankles, hips, and head. So this is what we always focus on. And to be honest with you, my best athletes are usually most of my female athletes are gymnast backgrounds. I'm saying almost 80% of my top sprinters have a gymnast background.
So
So
what
the,
about a gymnast that makes it, make them efficient in sprinting, in track and
I
field?
think just the conscientiousness of knowing where your body is at, knowing, coming from a background of being conscious of your posture, hip placement, how you plant. Foot plant is key in sprinting. And just as much as that's key in sprinting, it's very much, key in gymnastics. The foot plant matters a lot. So, these are the factors and alignment, body alignment. And these things are really relatively, exclusive type of lingo and conversation to this type of sport. I mean, the carryover is very clean for gymnastics and sprinting because of that, and plus the coaching aspect. Most of my female athletes that come from a gymnastics background have been thoroughly coached, well, usually, what I mean, as far as they know processes, warming up, cooling down, stretching, all these different things that correlate into sprinting are very much tied into gymnastics.
Yeah. So what are some of the differences that you see? Like, we mentioned earlier the dorsiflex, the lack of dorsiflex. Also, I think I see a lot of gymnasts who run with straight arms, kind of having just like almost popsicle stick arms, just, swinging
Hmm.
like that, and what are some of those differences that, in gymnastics that are different in track and field.
I mean, just from watching, and I've worked with many gymnasts, I think the big difference, like you're saying, is most gymnasts don't have a background in track or sprinting. So the things that I see that are different would be the toes pointing down, not having dorsiflexion. Um, Same thing with the arms that you were describing. Not understanding um, how to how to stride under themselves and not in front of themselves, which is overstriding or reaching is what we call it. So these things, those are small things that we pick up from sprinting that are very detailed, that when you apply it to gymnastics, allows for more effective execution, specifically on vault, because of the direct correlation of force.
Yeah. And now I'm a huge believer that, when you're training sprinting, you're also
Hmm.
training aspects where you're ready to take on the force. It's not just applying
Hmm.
force, right? I think it's also
Hmm.
taking on the force because
Hmm.
one thing I used to tell my athletes or other coaches and stuff like that whenever I would do conditioning and stuff is, especially during the season, you're trying to create a capacity, and also you're trying
Hmm.
to be able to create a resistance. So, and what I mean by that is capacity to be able to have, enough power force to be able to do your skills, but also having the capacity to take on those forces that are going to be coming back when you do your landings, or,
Hmm.
the force that's hitting back at you when you're hitting the ground, when you're hitting your stride, or you're about to land your vault, or you're going to land a dismount on beam, vault, or bars, and I think sprinting really helps teach those types of things. And I want to kind of talk about,
Can you hear me?
yes, go ahead.
All right. No, I definitely agree with that. I think that you know, exactly like the correlation of sprinting allows the athletes to be able to take in um the forces that come back to you, as well as like it allows them to execute more consistently throughout the tournament. Like they'll last longer. They'll be able to continue to execute. 'Cause there's a certain level of muscular endurance as well as fitness that comes along with that, and that allows you to perform better over time through rounds.
Yeah. Now, when you say you get a gymnast, right? You talked about
Hmm.
how 80% of your top sprinters are gymnasts. So when you get a new
Hmm.
one who comes over
Hmm.
and decides that they're going to pursue track, or they want to pursue track alongside of gymnastics, what do you first kind of do? If you're going to teach, gymnasts or gymnastics coaches how to break down their running to be able to become efficient in what they do.
Um, I think the first thing that I break down, especially working with gymnasts, um, is the landing of the feet. How to apply force to the ground. So a lot of times you find with gymnasts, like I said, the feet are pointed down, so they'll often landing on their toes. They're not landing on the midsole, which is a larger surface area, allows for more stability, and allows for you to have a more evenly applied surface area to apply more force stably. So those those are the main components, and they usually have good posture. I think the main difference is that you'll see a lot of shoulders back, you know, where we're more of a little bit of shoulders rounded forward a bit to allow us to have a position where our bodies are more in a position to have our hips up, so our shoulders are a bit more rounded and allows us to engage our core. This bold effect or this body shape is quite different than most gymnasts, because most gymnasts are going to be open and shoulders back a bit. So those are some of the small things and the detailed things that I focus on initially, just so that as they train, They're able to train pain-free, injury-free, and be effective, you know.
Yeah.
As they go back to gymnastics with these same skills, they're able to go faster and do more because they have a stronger understanding of how their feet and their body and their posture is. So it kind of correlates really well.
Now, how does an athlete, especially a gymnast, when they're limited in their amount of runway or that they have to be able to get the maximal power or speed and then translate it. So how do you build that in a gymnast? So um, typically if someone's in a pretty fast elite sprinter in regard to,
Mhm,
or they're just fast in gymnastics, the
mhm,
runway is about 80-82 feet. That's like the
mhm,
max that most of them kind of go in most, in common meets and stuff like that, and
mhm,
some people can make that sprint, in 8, 10, 12, 14 steps. It depends, on the
mhm,
faster, and they can do it in 8 plus their hurdle
mhm.
and create a big vault. So what would I do to maximize that many that much power and speed in such a short amount of time, especially compared to the lengths that are in track and field?
Yeah, I think just understanding body angle and posture and how to project and push the body out. Those are the things that we focus on a lot, projection and pushing the body out. With that such a short runway, you have to have a concept of that as well as a strong concept in that, as well as having a good concept in acceleration. So to be able to create that momentum and then accelerate the momentum quickly. So I think those two practices is what we focus on in track, specifically the projection portion and the acceleration portion. So though exercising those skills will allow you to call on those skills when you're out there on the floor, having to be able to try to execute in that short runway. So that would be my answer, which is, you're practicing more on pushing your body in those angles and committing to that through your hips. And that's not a natural thing. That's something that you would have to get used to, over time.
So what are some like basic things? Because I think most people know high knees, butt kickers.
Hmm.
They know A skips.
Hmm.
Sometimes they know B skips. Doing what we call in gymnastics deer runs, which are really bounds in
Hmm.
track and field or other sports. Those are
Hmm.
the common things, are like high knee skips. To kind of work on some of those things. What are some other ways to do it, to teach things, little drills that they can do in the gym, but also what is some cues when they're doing stuff? Because I know for me, when I'm coaching my own athletes on running specifically, I really break down like where the ankle needs to be, where the knees need to be, where the hips need to be, especially on
Hmm.
like if I'm walking through a high knee or a skip. um I tell my athletes, I want your ankle to be underneath your knee. And
Hmm.
where if I'm going to go do a butt kicker, I want that heel to be underneath your butt, but the knee
Hmm.
height to still be the same place that you have it in your high knee, right? You still want to be able to have that come up, but then having the heel come up, which from my understanding is called heel recovery, being able to
Hmm.
have that, and then drive and extend and drive it down, which gets into your B skip, right? And so
Hmm.
what are ways to be able to break down some of these mechanics so then they become automatic and more efficient, so then they're propelling and pushing their self forward rather than either overextending or running behind them, because they're doing butt kickers where their knees pointing down and their heel is almost
Hmm.
taking the hip line of their back.
I think it starts with two things. First is understanding the position of the hips, having an understanding, is my pelvic anteriorly tilted or is my, pelvic in a positive neutral state. So we want to be in a positive neutral state where our hips are in front. So that's one of the keys. Hips in front. Usually they have to keep their glutes engaged. Um, Really big tip and cue. If you're trying to land flat and straight to the ground, it's impossible if you're doing that on your toes or if you're landing not flat enough to the ground. So we actually teach our athletes to think to land through their heels, but because they have a slight forward lean, they'll actually land on their midsole to forefoot, which is where you want to land. So it's a compensation cue basically. And we cue, and that's a big thing for us, making sure that we teach the understanding of what an adjustment makes a difference and why it does make a difference. But those are the two components I think would be the main factors in that, just focusing on keeping the hips in front and then also understanding simply, and then we do this simply through drills. Like you asked me what drill I would use, probably just regular snap down drill where you have wickets or cones that are either elevated at like 9 inches or so, depending on the age of your kid. But basically, they have to keep their heel recovery high, and then once they get close over to the cone, they have to translate their entire body, their hips high, and snap down and land stiffly on a straight stance leg. So their stance leg has to be directly straight. You'll find a lot of common issues of kids landing incorrectly, so they're bent a little bit, things of that nature. And these things is where the energy leaks out. This is where you don't have direct force application. So, I mean, we're talking pretty coach like right now, but for the layman's individuals that the straighter the levers are, the more direct the force application is. So it's basically I can push out at 100%, and if I'm bent, I'm pushing at about 70 or 80%, you know? So that's the concept. And we want to be as efficient as possible, as we discussed earlier. So I think, simple drills that teach that common concept of having your heel high, snapping your feet back down. You have to have a certain amount of space between the ground and your feet to create the amount of force that's needed to displace your body. And this is just simple physics. So that's the main thing we're coaching early because we don't like to complicate. We try to keep it very simple. And plus, this is not their primary sport usually. So it's like we're just trying to give them a skill that will translate over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also, the technical aspect, because in gymnastics, pretty much everything is technical, at least for
Mhm.
most people. They say the technique is for the weak, where some people who are just, the those natural athletes who can just produce speed and power or skill just because they can. That's
Who
not the
said
majority.
technique is for the weak though? Who said that?
So that's like a common thing sometimes. That's a common thing sometimes in regards to like if I you'll hear that sometimes on even bars, like if
Mm,
athlete is not strong. So sometimes like if I'm trying to do my kip handstand, so I do my glide kip handstand, whatever, some people need to be more technically sound so they can use
mhm.
technique and timing
That's
rather
true.
than strength to
I get
be
what you're saying.
to
Yeah,
get.
rather than talent. Yeah, rather than
Yes.
talent is yeah. I got
And
you an
so,
ability. I
and
can.
it's not necessarily like trying to knock anything, because I think there's
No, no.
athletes who are super talented and are really technical and stuff like that. But sometimes there's athletes who are just not as quick twitch or not as strong,
Yeah.
and they
I
have.
think technique is for the long lasting. Like there's longevity in having very strong technical prowess. Not
I
just,
agree.
performance enhancing ability, but you're gonna be able to do this longer because you're doing it correctly.
I agree, especially when it comes to running on vault.
Yeah.
Because if you were to come to a gymnastics competition and I brought you to
Hmm.
level 8, for most coaches, that's when they start their heart starts beating fast, just because that's
Hmm.
the first opportunity that a gymnast is able to go and compete a flipping vault on a hard surface. And sometimes it can be scary just because athletes are either not. I honestly think a lot of it is they're not fast enough to produce enough
Hmm.
power and then translate that, because I know most coaches do a lot of technical work on the
Hmm. Hmm.
springboard, the hand mat, the table, and
Hmm.
landing stuff, which is super great and super important.
Hmm.
But if you are missing a major component that takes a majority of the time of your.
That's the main ingredient. I look at that as the main ingredient, right?
Yeah.
Because the higher you have, the more airtime you have, the more time you have to do whatever you're trying to execute, right?
Right. And it's, I think being able to also, time it well, which I think the other counter that people might have to if someone runs really fast is, are they able to really control their
That see,
speed?
and that's a big thing though, and that's a huge thing because people don't understand that. I work with hurlers, and that's a common thing where you get your hurler really fast and they can't time it well in the beginning, but then once they do, it's amazing.
Yes.
So yes, there's some truth to that, but that's to anything, isn't it? Right? You know what I mean? Like at first, it's going to be fast to us, and then we have to learn that we can control it. But without it being fast at all, you won't have the potential to become greater.
Right. And I also think, the tension that is created because there has to be, like you said, a straight line. And to me, when I think about like pressure and tension, I think of those two things are different. So it's like
Mhm,
taking a straight line and
mhm,
making sure there's no bends in it, right? So if I take my
mhm,
finger and I go like
mhm,
this and I go, okay, there's tension because it's straight and it's tight. If I do
mhm,
this, there isn't
mhm,
tension anymore, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
so
mhm,
pressure though is when I push it into
mhm,
my hand or into something,
mhm,
right? So in gymnastics commonly, we talk about pressure all the time on bars. And for me, so
mhm,
like if I'm on bars and I'm going to do a handstand, I'm going to make sure my
mhm,
arms are straight. We talk about that all the time, make sure the wrists are straight in a good
mhm,
position. But I can do this all day and never have pressure and can't really go
mhm,
as far, right? Um,
mhm,
I have to activate that, right? I
mhm,
have to make sure that there's pressure down into the bar or whatever.
mhm,
But also, and the reason why I kind of bring it up is in running, if you talked about if you hit the ground and it doesn't strike straight, right? There's a
mhm,
leak of tension. But then
mhm,
also there could be a lack of pressure. Like
mhm,
hitting first with your toes pointed, it takes a lot
mhm,
more time for the recoil to happen, right? Because you got to
mhm,
go
mhm.
down and then back up instead of
And
hitting.
you're absorbing the force as well.
Exactly. Right. And
Mhm,
so being able to have, a straighter like force. So, when I come down, I strike straight. Plus, I'm able to extend all the way through my foot and then recover that as quickly as possible. You
mhm,
know, um, and so, talking about the importance of those things and even just how to really like emphasize, the tension and then
mhm,
the pressure to put
mhm,
into the ground, which I think we just call like force, right?
mhm,
It's like tension plus pressure to me
mhm,
equals like the force that you're going to put in to the ground. So if you lack tension, you're not going to be able to produce as much force. If you have tension but you don't put as much pressure into the ground,
mhm,
again, you're not going to be able to produce as much force and it's going to take you only so far, right? Um,
mhm.
so can you kind of talk about, that importance, but also ways to just, drill that concept into, running techniques, especially for gymnasts?
So specifically to tension and applying force, I mean, everything that we do and that we apply in our drills and our mechanics and the running mechanics for everything that we do for drilling for sprinting is based on um, body coordination towards applying force from a high place. That's why we focus on having a high hip height and focus constant on having a straight stance leg, like we talked about, to create that. So these concepts are done through our A skips, B skips, our snap down drills that you're doing as well. The drills with the cones you're snapping down, our skips, our switch drills where we're working on keeping the heel recovery up, snapping from a high place. A lot of small drills like those really isolate the athlete and teach them how to strike more effectively, more efficiently for themselves. Because a lot of athletes, if you look at them from a front end, you might see that their knees are bowed out or knees are bowed in or things of that nature, or their feet are striking on the outside, not having a straight path, lining in the middle. So these are very small, the definitive details that usually are not focused on unless you get to these type of sports, so, which is track or something like that.
Right.
So this is I guess, the advantage. But going back to what teaches these concepts of tension and applying force or pressure is realistically the A skips, the switch drills, everything where you have to pick up your heels and then drop them back down with a lot of power. This, once again, is a skill. You know what I mean? These are not common. What people think fast is, which is a lot of frequency, they think of quick. That's
Yeah.
quick.
Right.
But really, fast is actually covering a lot of ground in a little bit of a time. So
Right.
realistically, the last 10 meters of every race probably would be considered what fast is. Like in the 100, world-class sprinters cover almost about, 11, 12 yards in one step, you know? That's one step. So that is what fast is like. And I think that's the key to understanding is that how much force does it take or how much pressure does it take to generate the type of displacement that you're looking for in your sport or in your event. And that's what we work on in our drills is to try to maximize the effectiveness of that skill.
Now, when it comes to, we talked a little bit about overstepping, right? And I think people do that because they're trying to increase their stride length. You know,
Mm-hmm.
how do you like teach that concept of, having a efficient length of a stride without reaching, and what causes the reaching? What is someone really doing when they're reaching,
So,
versus what are they doing when they're increasing efficiently their stride length?
so when you're running and you're sprinting, um, the more you're able to land under your center of mass, the more effective the force application will be at displacing your center of mass. Yeah, so basically, as you land and you're reaching, which is your step should be, you want to land under your center of mass so you can propel and displace your body forward and outwards. If you're landing in front of yourself, or if your feet is landing in front of your center of mass, then it's pushing your body back. Also, it's putting the disproportionate amount of strain on your hamstring as well, because it's supposed to be a quad dominant action if it was in alignment. And that's another benefit of being in alignment. Not only are you creating more force effectively and efficiently, but you're doing it safely, to where it works with your body ergonomically. So the main thing um, in whenever you're trying to focus on getting your sprint technique together, I think would be the focus on, for one, having your core, which is a big thing in gymnastics, having that rigidity, and to be able to keep your hip in a position to where it's in a neutral position. You don't have an anterior pelvic tilt. And what is an anterior pelvic tilt? Basically like a sway in your back where your butt is back and you see, and usually the chest is out. What we want to see more of is the shoulders stacked with the hips and the ankles. And that's a big thing, even in gymnastics as well. So we want to see their body to stack. So these are the things that I see, that are most applicable, and that are most technical for, sprinting on a gymnastic level. And it's really not super like complex. It's fairly simple and it's pretty easy. It's just understanding though. It's simple. It's just understanding. Once you have a common knowledge of what it is, how to do it, then you understand you can get better at it. So then you can call on more speed. And
Yeah.
that's the cool thing about knowing it. Well, it takes a lot of the talent out of the game. And I think that's going to really change the game for you specifically, and a lot of coaches that are going to start to implement more sprint techniques into gymnastics. I think that's going to help a lot because, you know, it's pretty easy. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
how to explain
Yeah, no, for
it.
sure. Because one thing I think about too, like, and we can talk about this is,
Mhm,
when you're working some of these drills. So say I'm doing my A skips or my high knees.
mhm.
Sometimes people think it's more about getting the knees up, right? Because you talked about making sure you have good posture and good hip
Well,
position.
see, I don't think it's about getting the knees up. I think it's more about getting the heel up, and that'll have your knee up. See, when you're leading with your knee, it causes your hip to pull in a different style of pulling. If you're pulling straight from your heels, then you're pulling from your thigh block. Your entire thigh is pulling, your hips, your whole block is coming up. So that's a different concept than leading with your knee. Leading with your knee is just bending your knee up, which will have your heel kind of slowly being pulled and you'll be floating. When we're trying to create a piston action or spring action, where it's being cocked back and punched back, cocked back and punched back, that concept is different. So you can't, it's too passive doing it the other way. So you don't lead with your knee, you lead with your heel. And that, that's another thing about coaching. People cue incorrectly and look for correct results. Like if somebody would have said lift your knees up and that kid is thinking proprioceptively from their knee, meaning they're feeling from their knee to pull it up, they're going to float. There's not going to apply force directly down. It's going to make them do the opposite actually. So this is the reason why knowing this helps, because you're supposed to keep your heels up, which will get your knees to come up high. So you coach and cue the driving force of the reaction, not the reaction that you see.
Yeah.
That's the problem. A lot of people see high knees and they're like, yo, that's what I want. Let me cue that. No, you need to figure out what drives that. So driving your feet down harder and then keeping your heels up higher allows for that to occur. So these are the cues to achieve that, instead of saying, I want high knees, high knees, high knees, high knees, knees up, knees up, knees up.
Right. Now, if I'm walking through, say, the high knee positions, right? And
Mhm.
is the strike down causing the next leg to the next, heel to
Automatically,
come
yes.
up? Because I think
Exactly.
again,
So you slipping down and being conscientious of having your heels coming up. So you don't have to pull it up. You step down and to think of it to let it to come up. It's a let to happen. As you become better at force application and drilling, things happen off of not thinking, not from thinking. The point of drilling is to do this without having the conscientious thought of doing it. It's drilled into our second nature. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to accomplish. We're not drilling to drill. We're not trying to be robotic. We're
right,
trying to create a pattern that naturally ingrains into our natural movement over time. So this is the reason why we focus so much on drilling, because it's very short amount of time and a lot of pressure usually. So you have to be able to execute these things without thinking as much. And
right.
that's why drilling are so important, because a lot of times people will see sprinting or sprint drilling and like, this is what you do every day. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah, no, for sure. And I
and,
think it's
and it is
important.
what it is. You know what I mean? Like we do this to ingrain this.
And I think there's times where you could almost focus on just, your A skips and your B skips and get a lot out of that, right? You can develop so much out of it. But, you have to know what you're saying, what you're looking for,
The intention
trying to
of it.
do
Yeah.
exactly. And I know
The
those are things you've
intention.
talked to me about, and even just like correcting my cues in my B skips. Like, being transparent, like I used to tell, athletes to extend the leg as it comes down on a B
Mm-hmm.
skip, which is incorrect, in
Mm-hmm.
conversations that, you
Mm-hmm.
and I have had, and, doing more
And that's
research and
something that
watching
you
videos.
allow to happen. So it's not fully incorrect. It's just you don't cue that. You cue the downstroke, and then the natural cast that which you see from a B skip happens. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's what we're talking about. The results, right? You see it, it looks like that. But to the athlete, when you cue it for it to be effective, it has to be cued like this, though. You know what I mean? And that's the differential, I think, in knowing how to sprint. It changes a lot. Changes a lot. Allows you to do things more effectively, quicker. And like, me and you talk about a lot, it's very easy. It's not just knowing.
Right.
It's simply knowing it. You know what I mean?
Right. And in track
Yeah.
and field, there's a few events that I think directly translate to similar concepts. So I think
Hmm.
high jump, long jump, the triple jump, and pole vault,
Hmm.
directly translate to sprinting on vault, because you're going from a fast force to having to put your foot down and create a, like we talked about, a vertical position that you're trying to
Hmm.
go. So going from horizontal to vertical, or hurdles,
Hmm.
and then going back down to go horizontal again.
Well,
um
even hurdles are very much like vaulting. Hurdles are like vaulting. I mean, I work with one of the top coaches in the world in hurdles. He was the Olympic coach for Germany for the last 10 years, Marlon Odom. And I've been learning a lot. And that concept of like it's opened up to me where it's just exactly like vaulting. the more speed you have in hurdles, the harder it is to negotiate the time, the hurdle, you know? So with that aspect, the rhythmic aspect comes in, timing it. So that's in sprinting as well, rhythmic aspect. So, these are very defined, definitive things that you pick up from sprinting and hurdling and things of that nature. So, I think it's very, 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 very deep and beneficial how much track can correlate with gymnastics and how much gymnastics correlates with track.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
'Cause
I think,
sometimes-
yeah, as
yeah.
it
Go ahead.
grows, it's gonna come closer together, I believe. I mean, it has for me at least.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say 90 to 80% of my athletes, females, have a gymnastic background.
Right. And a lot of them, when they, either start to entertain track, because I
Hmm.
have had a handful of athletes who are, track athletes. I currently actually have one who just hung up her leotards and picked up her track shoes just because she um, broke her school record, in her
Hmm.
first like two competitions for pole vault.
Hmm.
She's a
Hmm.
taller, longer kid with long legs, who was able to do well in it and now is going to
Hmm.
pursue that as her, athletic, path that she wants to go and hopefully pursue collegiate and then see how far she goes. Um,
Hmm.
but sometimes I think um the misconceptions, right? Because like most of the times, when a gymnast goes to track and field, people automatically think about pole vault just because that relates more, in regards to just the aesthetics of how it looks to
Hmm.
track and field, right? Because on bars they're swinging, they have strong cores,
Hmm.
they can get upside down, they're used to doing that.
Hmm.
They're powerful just because of some of the tumbling that they do or just having to do
Hmm.
vault and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
I also think, like you said, you have, some of your top sprinters are gymnasts,
And hurdlers too, and jumpers too. I mean, it just correlates, man. Y'all, that, like I said, gymnastics develops a lot of powerful, stable, cognizant athletes who are cognizant of their body posture and just understand, aware, physically aware and of their bodies. That physical awareness is key in sprinting. So those it just crosses over so easily. I mean, it just truly does. And then understanding body positioning is just everything to us. And
right,
that's everything in gymnastics. So I think, the crossover is there. I think the more coaches that we have that really understand and learn and take the time out to learn, like you have and others have, at the higher levels, it's going to really take the sport to a new height. It's going to save a lot of injuries too,
right,
where kids can do it longer, stronger without, and have more fun doing it with less injuries.
right. And it, to kind of talk about a little bit, I think it's a huge thing, like the correlation between your arms and your legs,
Hmm.
and kind of
Hmm.
talking about that, being efficient in gymnastics. That's huge. Like what your arms do is going to really correlate to what your legs do. If I have
Facts, facts.
just a hurdle, if I don't really if I'm not efficient with my arms, then I can't
Hmm.
back anything out like underneath. If I'm tumbling,
Hmm.
if I want to have a big pass, like
Hmm.
say I'm doing a double back, if I am, you know, lackadaisical, or if I just don't extend my arms as much,
Hmm.
it takes a lot more for my legs to have to do, right? But also I give
Hmm.
it less direction to go, because I only say I stop it here. I can only rise so high now, right? But if I get them
Hmm.
out of the way and I extend, I make it long. Now I make more room for my hips to get involved and to take over and create rotation. Plus, I gave it the direction that I want it to go. I said, hips, I need
Hmm.
you to go here, So
Hmm.
again, it's going to go there. So talking about running, how important is what the arms are doing and to cadence those feet in regards to rhythm, but also the efficiency? And what are some cues that I could use? Or these other gymnastics coaches could use to really make sure that their what their legs are trying to do is also being helped by their arms.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's everything. So I think the arms drive the legs, and that's really the key. We think from our arms first, literally. So all of our drilling is based on having a correlation from the wrist to the ankle, elbows to the knees. So the left wrist and the opposite ankle is in correlation. So as you pick up that leg, and you're dropping your hands down, your ankles will come down. So these things are all correlated together. What I see as a common misuse is that an athlete will open up the lever, they'll do this or do that, things of that nature, where it's quite easier and more effective just to have a shorter lever, elbows out a bit, and just drop and relax the scapula. And that's the key to all of this is just understanding the fluidity of movement and the correlation of arms to legs and how do you time those things. And that's why we drill. Literally, that's the reason. So everything you're discussing, in pieces right now is really just the fundamental reasons why we drill, you know, and why we do the drills that we do, that you do the drills that you do, is to correlate our arms and our legs together in timing. And then to be able to call upon it, like you said, if you wanted to have a double back and you have a more of a outward reach with the arms allows you to do more and create more space as well as have a straighter reach and apply more force easily. Same thing for us with our drilling, correlating with our arms and our legs is that as we get to wanting to displace our body more, we can learn how to use our arms more. Or if we want to push out further in the beginning of a vault, we can use our arms bigger there. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
these are the things that we understand. So whenever we run, like we do a start, I'm not, I don't look at how far they're running or how fast they're moving. I'm really looking at how big their arms are opening and what type of shapes they're creating. The shapes
Yeah.
tell me more than me having a stopwatch.
No, for
So
sure.
so that's pretty much the correlation with arms. Arms and leg correlation is key. Arms are the driving force for the legs.
Now, I I started this thought and kind of drifted away from it when we were talking about the
Hmm.
correlation from gymnastics and the track events. Um, and I was really the point that I was trying to make is how do I transfer like that top end speed to an efficient hurdle, right? Because before I hit that vault, I'm gonna hurdle. So putting my force and almost not necessarily stopping it, but redirecting it, to either turn over going backwards or to efficiently
So
hit
I
the
think it
vault.
would be a cut step. So whenever you go into hurdling, that's why I say I think vaulting matches hurdling because you have to, it's similar, like you said. You have to, what we say a cut step is whenever you see a hurdler go towards a hurdle, they're actually speeding up the frequency. They're sort of cutting their steps down. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they're like pop, 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 pop. So they're picking up, coming to the hurdle. So like they're like come off the hurdle. That's why you keep seeing them. So they're picking up, coming into it. That's would be the key to the vault. You pop, 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 pop. So then it allows them shorter strike time to be accurate on the timing, so they can pop off. So if it's too open, the opportunities are a lot less. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Right.
So then as you cut the steps down, as you get closer to it, that's the key. And that's what I'm saying. That's the technical aspects of sprinting and
Right.
hurdling. You can apply that literally. And I'm not a vault coach. Don't get me out here vault coaching on the podcast. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
but what I'm getting at is I know from science and biomechanics that would probably be the most effective way, or at least that'd be one way to try to work at it. You know what I mean?
Right. Because I
So
think that's one thing that is common is, athletes either they don't know how to control it, one, or they,
mhm.
people will feel like if I make them fast, how will that translate to when they have to
Well, you can
redirect?
dial it. You can dial it though. That's what I was getting at. Like you getting faster is learning the skill, so you can dial it the way you like. You don't have to come in with. You can come in with this, but you don't have to. Where before you were reaching and doing these other things to try to get to this amount of force. It's about creating velocity a lot easier. It's not just about increasing your velocity to a highest amount. Does that make sense?
Right.
That's really how I think it should be looked at more of, because in hurdling, you don't have to be the fastest sprinter to hurdle at the world class level, but you do have to have a baseline of high level sprinting in you to be able to compete at the world class level. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So I think it's similar to vaulting, right? You can get away with some things, but as it rises, you won't get away with that. And it's the same thing for any other event, in gymnastics.
Right.
You won't get away with not having that force and that power and that ability to stabilize. You can't get away with that over time. You
Yeah.
may get away with it young, but you won't get away with it over time. You know what I mean?
Right. And do you guys do a lot of nonlinear training too? Because in our
Yes.
sports, everything is linear. But if you make a misstep or a mistake, most of the time it's a nonlinear mistake, right? And that usually causes for
That's our main focus in the off season is lateral, lateral, circular, and twisting and turning. We want to hit different planes. And really, the body, though it looks linear, it's always moving in a lot of ellipses and curves. It's moving in constant curves. A lot of bows in there. So we see it as linear because we're looking at points, which is shoulders, hips, ankles, and stuff like that. But if you look at it from the front, you can see a lot more of how it's more circular and things of that nature. So yes, we train a lot of, lateral, um, everything. I mean, we just train in so many different movement patterns because, like you said, to create linear, you must have strength and stability in controlling the torsion and all the things that you have in your body that's going through your body, the forces, because the forces are going to try to take you away from center line. And
right,
because you're stronger, you know how to apply force correctly, you'll stay more center line.
right.
So
Now,
yeah, we do a lot of lateral training.
no, that's good because I'm a huge believer in that.
Hmm.
Doing a lot of that, just again, for the whole sport of gymnastics, because you're even though it's linear in concept, and you talked about the different waves, they're also, when you're twisting, right, you're adding a linear plus a rotational force, right, together. And if you land incorrectly, and it
Hmm.
doesn't land on that linear, path where you can just take a step back or your feet together
Hmm.
and just bend and absorb, and you take those missteps, those can be season ending, right? Or
Yeah.
you come in and your foot is still twisting while the rest of your body is stopped, or your upper body's,
Hmm.
or your legs are planted in the ground, and there goes your knees and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I think alongside those things, it's super important. And going back to the beginning, how I said, when you're training efficient sprinting, I believe it's allowing you to have better capacity, right? Capacity in those ankles, one, which is, excuse me, a huge common area that gymnasts get hurt in. Two, your lower back, right, having that stiffness and squeezing your glutes, like you said, because then the force doesn't keep transferring and moving, up the chain. It stops in some of those major muscles where it needs to,
Hmm.
instead of traveling and hitting the lower back, where
Hmm.
sometimes it could be weak. Lack of engagement, creates for leakage, and now you have back
Hmm.
injuries, right? And then also,
Hmm.
knees and hamstrings, and then having too dominant of quads versus having a healthy ratio between your quads and
Hmm.
your hamstrings, but also your
Hmm.
hips, right?
Hmm.
Because especially in sprinting, especially in gymnastics,
Hmm.
everything we do comes through that hip, right? And
Yeah,
is
facts.
it is dictated by what you can do with your hips, because that's where your
Hmm.
center of gravity is. That's what's creating
Hmm.
rotation, that's creating force,
Hmm.
that's creating those pivots and levers and stuff like that. And if you aren't able to efficiently train those properly, then they're going to get tired on you, right? And when they get tired and you're needing it to, hey, I'm in the finals for the 100 or for the 200, or I'm in, at the top of the levels, and it's the end of the season, I'm at nationals, and man, my hips are tired,
Hmm.
and I go and I do my vault, and they give on me. Now I don't get, the potential that I have, just because I
Hmm.
haven't properly trained those areas or overtrained certain areas, and I just fatigued them, you know.
Hmm.
Can you talk just a little bit about what are some good things to be able to create healthy balance in those areas, really from like the core down, or and then also talking about what should be a good ratio in regards to like a quad to hamstring type of ratio.
Mm. Uh, Quad to hamstring ratio. I mean, That's, I think the balance of what you're doing. I mean, sprinting is more of a quad dominant concept because you're applying force through your quads down, but obviously you need to use your hamstrings to cycle and use your legs and all these things. Everything works in conjunction, but it's mostly quad dominant as far as force application. So, um, but with that being said, though, you can tell what's lacking in most in training probably would be, posterior chain training, and development as well as recovery. So if it's quad dominant, then you would think that the backside is weaker, obviously, right? Or it's less focused on, or it's less needed or so. And that's quite actually the most of our training, or a good amount of our training is to alleviate what's usually the weak spot. So that's that. As far as like the core and the hips and the things that we do to develop those things in the back. I mean, we just do strength training. I mean, we do core work every day. We have a set regimen, multiple styles of core, from dynamic core work to stability work. I mean, we do a lot of different types of core work, not just working on the external use of the abdominal muscles, but the actual internal strength of the diaphragm and the abdomen area. Learning how to use our internal diaphragm to push out against our stomach walls, to make our core rigid. These are things that you would find in swimmers and singers and things of that nature using our diaphragm. Um, but I think outside of that, I mean, we just do a lot of, like I said, strength and conditioning. We do hip mobility. It's a lot. It's a big importance for us, having not only strong hips, but mobile hips. So having strength and length, being able to move them in different positions and being strong in those movements. These are the concepts that we focus a lot on. But for us, it's about preventative injury stuff. I think the same thing for gymnastics.
Yeah,
So you usually reinforce certain areas, knowing that those areas are going to take a lot of pounding.
right,
So I mean, I think they're quite similar. Ankles, knees, hips, uh, core work, obviously. You know,
right.
and as you get to do more, you start to work on your neck as you create more velocity. So because as you move more, your head's gonna be going everywhere, and your head leads your body. So that'd be a major leap. But these are details over time that you add into your strength and conditioning and your development process of your athlete. And it's all progressive too. It's not just something you throw on a kid, but over time you work on certain pieces more as they grow. So it is what it is.
Yeah, no, that's good. And to talk about you personally,
Mhm.
in regards to your journey, to kind of tell the viewers and the listeners a little bit about you, kind of where did your journey of track and field start as a coach? But also, you as an athlete, and then what are some of your credibilities, eh, credentials in regards to just people that you produced. And I only really asks for because sometimes people would like to have an understanding of who someone is and the information
Okay.
they're saying. Where does it come from? Is it did I just randomly meet someone who says I teach people how to run? And so
Yeah.
just to give a little bit more credibility to the conversation, I want the viewers to kind of know a little bit about you, and then
Mhm.
we'll kind of plug in things that you're doing and stuff like that.
Yeah. I started off running track when I was a junior in high school. Was actually half Korean, half black. My mom's Korean and my dad's black. Met in the military. I didn't play sports growing up. My mom raised me to go to church predominantly. We went to a small church, and when you're in a small church, you're usually the deacon, the janitor, the treasurer, everything,
Yeah.
cleaning person.
I understand that my dad's a
So,
pastor,
so,
so I grew up in the church, so I know what you're talking
so
about.
a small church.
Yep.
So you know how it is. It's like, we do everything,
Yes.
and we in there every day.
Right. Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I was in there every day. So I was kind of away from the athletic world per se. My mom was more academic and stuff, and my dad was in the military. So my dad didn't retire till I was about 13 or 14. And, finally had my father back home. My dad was an athlete. And I'm like, man, I want to make this man proud. So I went out for football, didn't know nothing about the football, sucked. B team, JV type of guy. Track, sucked. It just got better. Just worked on it. I'm very strong-minded, focused a lot. My mom raised me that way early as a young kid in academics. So I just took what I learned, my academic concepts, and applied it to my track and learned about biomechanics. Never knew that it was a such thing as biomechanics, but studied slow motion video every day for an hour a day. I think I never missed a day for almost like 10 years or something like that. Like it could be a funeral, it doesn't matter. I would do about an hour a day. And it wasn't because I wanted, I mean, it's more because I needed to, not because I wanted to.
Right.
I, I got slow motion videos of, sprinting and learning mechanics. Um, but I ended up going to
Say that again.
in high school. I
Where'd you
ended
go to
up making
college, you said?
All-American in college. I had a lot of I'm sorry. Yeah, I went to University of Houston.
Okay.
I transferred to multiple schools, but I went to University of Houston initially. My journey in college was pretty rough because of the transferring. But the reason for the transfer is because I didn't understand the sprinting and I didn't understand the training concepts. And back in those days, nobody did. So I gathered all this information through studying. I studied the best of the best. I mean, I studied the Germans and the Russians from back in the 70s, from strength and conditioning stuff, from plyometrics. I studied Lawrence Seagrave, Charlie Francis. I mean, I just studied everybody. And then HSI. A lot of these guys now, they're my friends and they're my mentors. So we talk on the phone and stuff. So it's an amazing feeling. But I eventually got into coaching while I was still an athlete in college. I developed the fastest girl in the world in '07, the NCAA champion in '05, in the 60. Every year since I think '05 and '06, '07, I developed at least two or three of the fastest athletes in the world in different age ranks, collegiate, high school, or pro. As I got older, the list got more extensive. I've coached well over probably 200 to 300 plus professional athletes. I currently consult for some of the top nation sprint teams, and I work with Korea, which is my country. So I work with South Korea's federation. We do a lot of consulting nowadays. I mean, we're just doing a lot. We're talking with NFL, and we're just doing a lot of good, positive things. I don't want to boast my stuff too hard, but consider ourselves to be one of the top in the world, and we're looked at as one of the top resources in the world for speed and track and field. So, and this is not boasting, but our brand is one of the top track and field brands in the world currently. But I think the whole thing for me, I think that adds credentials to me is that I was very slow. And I learned how to become fast through science, through understanding that concept, of how to apply science and consistent training and programming. And I was able to take my lackluster abilities and take them to a pretty fairly far place.
Yeah.
So I think if I can make it, then you can. Of course, for me as a coach, I've coached, I'm now coaching at the highest level, at the very highest level. And I think the greatest reward of being at this level is to see other coaches and other athletes be able to take these concepts and use it to better benefit themselves and benefit their lives. Because I see how much of a blessing it is for me to see these things be open for me through just learning and understanding, like wisdom, gaining wisdom allowed me to be successful. And it was a big blessing. It changed the trajectory of my life, learning these things. So that's why I've been, I think my big popularity is because I share for freely online, that information that most people would charge for. And I do that because I want to see a global change
Yeah.
in what and it has been. I've seen it, where more people are learning who couldn't afford to learn. So that was one of our big principles.
And I think that's super important. I think it goes alongside perfectly with what Heat is about, right? Helping equip athletes to transform, right? And you're
Hmm.
giving them resources, you're giving them tools, especially the work that you did. And coming from a story where you weren't, the best of the best, because sometimes we
Hmm.
seek information from the best of the best, right? But
Hmm.
what drives sometimes the people when we see them at the best of the best is they had a uncommon story in regards to like they weren't the best. They had to grind, right? In the hip hop world, they say they had to get it out the mud, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
literally had to like build themselves up from nothing into something. And I think that makes a much more efficient and effective, especially coach, just because you had to not just rely on your talents, but you had to
Mm-hmm.
learn and you had to question. I think that's the biggest
Mm-hmm.
thing is you had to question everything that you were learning to be able to
Mm-hmm.
prove why it's effective or why it's not, and then to be able to
Mm-hmm.
come up with your own concepts and your
Mm-hmm.
own beliefs about those things. And for me, to share a little bit about my story is I wasn't a gymnast, so I'm learning
Mm-hmm.
this whole sport backwards. And
Mm-hmm.
fortunately, I've almost been coaching for a decade and a half,
Mm-hmm.
and you know learning it from ground zero to being able to make it to coach at the collegiate level and coaching athletes to make it to the college level. I haven't been fortunate yet to get to the point where I've had athletes at the Olympic level, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure the concepts are the same, right? you know
Mm-hmm.
um and even when I was an athlete, just like your story, I grew up in the church all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
I was not a good kid. I was super hyper. I was always here and there, but I was always active. I always wanted to go out. I like to do this and
Mm-hmm.
that, and I didn't allow like my behaviors and my actions didn't allow me to do athletic sports until I was really a junior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I as a junior, I ended up pole vaulting. I ended up, going out for football and then wrestling, and I did okay. I got an opportunity to do it collegiately for a couple of years, but even
Mm-hmm.
then, I wasn't, at the top of what I was. What I think
Mm-hmm.
really shaped me is, the lack of, but also,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the relationships with people. And that was something that
Mm-hmm.
just like instilled within me. Like I love, 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 love people, and I love to care about people, and I love to help them elevate and to help be a part of their journey on whatever their goals are, and however I can help or however I can keep them accountable, or if I can give them little tidbits, whatever. That's what gets me excited. It's not really in this sport, it's not really the gymnastic skills that really make me go, I'm super excited about, just because you can keep getting those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the relationships that you develop, and the journeys that you see people go on, the successes, the smiles, even just the
Mm-hmm.
difficult times, and seeing what characteristics are developed because of
Mm-hmm.
them facing those things are what drives me and what makes me
Mm-hmm.
hungry, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's literally why at this point I'm doing what I'm doing now. This podcast is not here for really a means to an end. It's not, it's where I literally want to pass on my experiences and also other people's experiences to hopefully help, like you're saying, globally, the world of sports, and
Mm-hmm.
starting in the area that I'm in gymnastics, and hopefully being
Mm-hmm.
able to expand it to other
Mm-hmm.
sports and stuff like that. So now we have a healthier relationship, with sports, between the parents, the athletes, the coaches, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. It's more about the relationships. I mean, if you're in the coaching game, you're gonna win and you're gonna lose. And you're gonna, even if you win a lot, you're gonna get tired of winning. It's not about that. The more you see these people grow and develop in front of you and being a part of that, it drives you. And plus things that you can't afford in life, things that are invaluable, with no amount of money could buy you, which is, having mentorship for your own kids through somebody that you've mentored. Having people to be there for you when you're going through your worst times, and just those type of things are just, there's no price for that. So those are the type of things that, I look forward to and I really cherish a lot, as I, grow as a coach and, you know, I'm at the little high place that I'm at, I guess, right?
Yeah.
You would think, we want to see gold medals and big contracts, and it's not really like that as you get to this place. You really want to see them get married and see their kids and
Yeah,
watch them grow up, and be a part of that and be at the wedding and smile and laugh. These are the things that we look forward to as coaches, way more than you winning that medal, man, or
absolutely.
being the best at your event.
Yeah, no, for sure. And talking about
Yeah.
those things, what are some of your values in your program? At Fast University,
hmm
what are your values? What do you stand on? What are the pillars of your program?
Our four principles are consistency, being persistent, being resilient, and being humble. Um, we're very much a family style of program. We believe in leadership primarily, and it's just focusing a lot on being able to support and lead the next people under you, So that's our concept primarily. So when you go to our practices and you're around our athletes, or if you're new to it, you'll be introduced to leaders immediately. Like you see my hat, that's why I have these hats. It's about leaders. So we just try to create as many leaders as we can. And the program starts off with you following and learning, and then it ends off with you leading. And that's on the ongoing thing. So even when you come back, they know who the leaders are from college and they come back and then you jump into your leadership role. So we teach a lot of leadership out here. And realistically for us, I look at us as like a family or a gang or whatever you want to call it. But we have extended family all over the world that train with us and coaches that are part of our network. So whenever we see each other, we're always big to like support. Like, oh yeah, I know her from, oh yeah, she's part of this. Oh, go ahead, yeah, girl, go ahead. We're very supportive. So these are some of our qualities. I mean, but the main thing for us is being very consistent, persistent, resilient, and being humble and living like a family.
No, I love it. I think those are very great principles that need to be abided by, and that we all, should and probably some are doing, which I think is it makes for great people tomorrow, right? And great,
hmm
moms and dads, or brothers and sisters, or uncles and aunts, or like you said, leaders. And that's, I think that's our job, as coaches, is to be able to help develop that in a positive way, in and positivity doesn't always look, the same in regards to it. Sometimes you got to be on those kids, right?
hmm
Because their potential, and what type of results that it could give, if they give less than what is required of them, because you're trying to save them from themselves sometimes. Because if you can give more and you give less, guess what? The next thing that shows up when you're on your own
hmm
and you decide to give less, that
hmm
could affect your family. It could affect you. It could end up putting you in places that you don't need to be. And I rather, especially when they're in their youth stages or in a controlled environment, I rather them make all those mistakes now, where they're able to learn without having such major consequences,
hmm
right? Rather than being on their own and making
hmm
these mistakes, or being making these mistakes in a controlled environment and never being checked on it. You
That's a funny story with that. I had a parent this morning. She DM'd me on Instagram, and and I mean I coach pretty directly, so I'll be transparent. What did I say? I said, "Oh man, that sucks for real. That's not good at all." And I ain't saying it to be mean. It was just truthful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's done this better. You've done this better. And
Mhm.
that's what we went back and fixed it, obviously. But she posted that in her story, and I'm like, why would you post out of all the videos we have of positive coaching?
Mhm. Yeah.
But that leads back to what you were saying though. She said, I truly appreciate the fact that you're not gonna let my daughter fail. You know what I mean? And I said, cool, I appreciate you, but we ain't gotta let everybody know I'm talking to her like this.
Yeah, no, for sure. But sometimes,
Yeah.
you can talk a certain way because you have certain relationships, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I was just being direct. It wasn't nothing derogatory, but
Exactly.
I find that, especially with these kids nowadays, for some of them, not all of them, we can't just lump them all together, but predominantly just because of that, the time and the era they're in. They're just receiving so much stimulus from, social media and phones and just the world in general that a lot of times you have to hit them with a strong message or a strong tone for it to even be receptive. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? For it to be even registered on the radar. So a lot of times those are my motivators to be extra direct in my tone or be very extra direct in my messaging. But my goal is never to be derogatory or taking them down. So
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I think that what you just said is super key because sometimes you are dealing with an environment that they grew up with or perspective that they only know, right? And so sometimes
hmm
you have to speak from that place for them to even hear you, because
factual.
again, that's what they know and that's how they
hmm
hear people. Or sometimes they know it so much that when you use it, it puts them in a different place. And having that understanding of, you know what, maybe their brother is always yelling at them. So if you yell at them, they're not going to listen to you anyway. They're going to shut down. So sometimes is
hmm
having certain language that you use,
hmm
and when I say language is like not colorful language where you got to cuss out a kid and all that stuff, but where you're just like, hey, I'm disappointed, and these are why, and make them
hmm
understand about themselves, like, oh man, like, whoa, it's bigger than
hmm
just the moment or whatever the thing that happened. Because
hmm
a lot of times it's not really the fact of whatever the obstacle is. It's very rare that the obstacle is the issue. A
It's
lot of
usually
the
the
times,
principle behind it and what the causes of not being able to understand the principles behind the situation. It's never usually the actual moment. It's usually like, what is the outcome over time if this continues or this doesn't get fixed?
no, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. Well, I
hmm
appreciate having you on. Where can viewers and listeners, check out more of what's happening with Will Collins and Fast University? What are your social medias? Are you on YouTube? And for people who may be listening, because I know, in Texas, gymnastics is huge, and
hmm
what part of Houston are you in? If anybody listening to this, if they're into track or if they're into another sport and they need a little bit of guidance, how could they reach out to
hmm on Fast University, it's at Fast University on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere. All you have to do is look up Fast University. I'm very easily found at Fast University. On Twitter, I'm faster, period. Um, and that's pretty much it. It's not hard to find me. I'm very easy to find. Like Prime, Coach Prime said, I ain't hard to
you? Yeah,
find.
for sure. Well, again, thank you so much, and thank you for tuning in
Thank you.
for another episode of Heated Conversations. Will Collins, we appreciate you so much and all the insights
Appreciate
that
you,
you
man.
have. And also for me, just thank you for being a part of my journey and helping me and continuing to help. And hopefully be able to give, effective, resources in regards to running technique and running efficiently for these coaches. Because I want to see these kids have safer vaults, have
hmm
vaults that even get bigger and keep elevating that event and keep elevating the potential, because that's what we want to do in life is keep elevating. So thank you everyone.